Hey guys, it is Adam Gersten with LFG Nexus, and we are here with presenting a live storyteller. I tell you, we're really excited. We're going to go ahead and, you know what, we're trying it again. Things went very well the first time and had a really good time. I hope you guys enjoyed too. If you guys haven't watched our first episode with Mr. Sean Mulhall, you can feel free to check it out. I believe it's still on Twitch right now. It's also on our LFG Nexus Facebook page, and there's different places where you can find it. But again, my name's Adam Gersten. LFG Nexus is kind of presenting this. LFG Nexus is a social media platform built for all types of gamers, from LARPers and board gamers all the way to esports, video games, VR, board games, mobile games, all sorts of stuff. But anyway, what we're doing today is we are trying to kind of help grow the LARP community. We're here to talk about some stories. We're here to talk about some different people that have been around LARPs, that have, and not just LARPing, but telling stories. That's really kind of what we're doing here. Telling stories is an amazing thing that we've been doing for years and years through oral tradition. That's how we learn, that's how we share. And so we just wanted to help create and share more stories that we've seen from different games. Obviously, games are very important. That's where we learn, or that's where, most people gamify things because it makes it easier and more tolerable, especially at this point, for people to get involved. So today we actually have an amazing storyteller. He's actually a game designer as well. So let me go ahead and do this. So actually, just let me tell you one or two of the rules. Just, we bring different people on here. The intent is to tell some stories, to learn a little bit about them, to understand why they got into LARPing or playing games. And that's a lot of kind of why we're doing this. We're here to kind of help the next generation, to incite, and not incite, but to get people interested in LARPing. We're here to kind of reminisce with some older friends, and just to have a good time for a little while. So, that's definitely what we're here for. We're not here to get into kind of politics. We're not here to air dirty laundry. We're not here to talk bad about people. We're just here to have a good time. Not that I think any of those things will happen tonight. But again, we are live, so feel free to ask questions in the and whether if you're in Twitch or Facebook Live or YouTube Live, and we encourage you to ask some questions. So without further ado, let me do a little video. All right, guys, and sorry, just because we have to pay the bills, I gotta do just one more quick.
Larping.com has scoured the earth to find the most listings, and that means the most pet-friendly listings for pet-loving renters. So you might say that you've brought more joy to more sweet, innocent, and adorable little creatures than any other site.
Ow, stop it.
With the most listings, you'll most definitely find the most right place on Apartments.com. Watch out, Juicebox. Apartments.com, the most popular place to find a place. There he goes.
All right, sorry about that. We just had to pay the bills. But without further ado, I'd like to bring to you guys Chris Dodson. Hey, Chris, how are you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Another day in paradise. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for coming on. Trying this out, and it's a bit of a kind of a play test for lack of a better term. But thank you for being our second victim. I mean, a storyteller. And let's just kind of jump in. Tell us a little bit more about kind of how you got started in LARPing.
So I got started in LARPing. Well, first tabletop role playing, but I always had this feeling, being a child, growing up in the woods. That was where we played in my generation, and the table was cool, and the ideas were great. I was inspired by reading Tolkien. I wanted to get out there. I wanted to be involved in that. Played some D&D, and ran into some guys that I played with. Ended up in a basement, and we had a regular weekly game in the summer, somewhere as a teenager. And one day, one of our group guys from our group came in and said, "Hey, what do you guys think about kind of trying this for real?" And passed out some carpet armor and big heavy sticks with duct tape on them. And we ran around in the backyard, and he was about 3 years older, and he beat the crap out of us, and found out later he was in this thing called the SCA. So it was a little hardcore start there, but I thought, this is really cool. This is the way to go. And several years later, I didn't really end up joining the SCA. It wasn't something that I really ended up in. But after I got out of high school, I found this creative loafing ad, and it was for a local game called Solar. And I said, this is what I'm doing. And I was also playing tabletop still at the time, and I took that to my tabletop group and said, we've got to go check this out. And we did, and that's where it started.
Wow. Okay, so you actually got started with SCA. Just for like our LARPers that are still kind of getting used to things, what is kind of SCA versus like Solar? Can you tell us just a little bit?
That's the Society for Creative Anachronism, which I'm not an expert on, and but it's more about actually honoring the medieval tradition and the crafts and the art of swordplay and anything to do with tapestry or anything like that. So they actually go out and run these events, but they're not there for rules and narrative, and they don't have a gameplay element to them. It's a cool organization. Definitely check it out if you're interested in that sort of thing, but it's not a game.
Okay, so now with the SCA, from my understanding, I've never actually played, but I've heard a little bit about it. That's a little bit more hardcore, I guess, maybe is a term. Is a little different than something than like
well, they fight in armor with rattan sticks wrapped in duct tape, and so you have to have a certain kind of armor on. So in that regard, it's a little more hardcore, but it's a little more heavier combat. But they have tournaments and duels, and but a lot of that's about gaining knighthood and getting better and better at that. So it has a slight sport aspect to it. In fact, there are games in Atlanta that you have that aspect where they're a little more sport-like. They get a little more physical in their combat, and then I think you have LARPing that is really about character interaction and story world. I sort of like a balance in the middle. I think I like my combat, but I need to have my bones working and all that. So yeah, but that's what kind of got me into it. But then I got into actual live action role playing.
So I'm not going to ask you to date yourself, although happy birthday, I believe, is in order. But so you got into Solar, and what kind of kept you in Solar? What was it that appealed to you?
Well, first of all, it was just mind-blowing to be out there experiencing this. That was at a time in my life where I was really glad to have sort of like a world to escape to. I guess I'd kind of always envisioned that sort of thing, and I grew up, like I said, in the woods. My grandfather was a hunter, and I loved the idea of getting out in the woods. And I didn't really want to hunt, not actual live things. That's not a thing that stuck with me, but that excitement about being out in the woods and having combat and the chase and all that was an aspect to it. The costumes were great. We're actually really doing it. I like the physical interaction of it, and so we got combat, and there's talking to real people, and so everything about it was just, and you were there for the whole weekend, and then the night falls, and you get to run around at night in the dark, and playing like hide from the spotlight games as a kid. There's just everything about the joy of running around being a kid was there, with the depth of a fictional world, and I was completely hooked.
Okay, so I completely understand. But let me ask you this: so on about 3 occasions now, you've mentioned, the chase, the being around in the woods. Is there a particular chase where maybe you were either being chased or got chased that was just like an incredible story that you kind of
story time on chases? There are so many of those. I used to be much faster. The skinny fast kid thing is real, and I'm not that guy anymore. But there was a time. I don't know if I can think of one specifically.
Okay.
I do remember, and sometimes they're not about, my stories that I remember not necessarily about me. I do remember a race with several of the fast. My brother actually he's faster than me. And so he got to enter into the race, but we watched this entire race and it turned out to be like a death race kind of idea. And there were people on the sides and, whatever might happen along the way. And that was just that crazy kind of thing. And it does remind me also of like the stag hunts. And later we brought the idea of the wild hunt that comes from, Celtic mythology and other traditions. And so having that where it was on and everyone's just running around and chasing this one stag, but they're also in competition with each other and lots of running through the woods. There's not a specific story that I can think of to be honest, but there are so many cases of just that kind of thing and different chases that are fun.
Okay. So you said that it was fun, kind of building these characters, and was there a particular character that stood out more to you? Like you said, it was taking place in a specific time in your life. When you actually come up with your characters, is there a specific character that you particularly, really kind of feel was true to you, or was it just more you played different characters at the time that relate to what's going on in your life?
So I think two characters stand out for me. Two very different characters. And the first character that I played, you kind of think about why do people get inspired to make whatever kind of character. And again, I was just absolutely, just enthralled with Lord of the Rings when I read it in middle school. And I remember my first character in D&D was going to be a ranger. And it was just, you do that thing, where you just name him right. You haven't thought a lot about this character thing. And I just named him Aragorn, and that's what I was going to play, right? And you get some more thought into that, but different things influence you. And so when I played many characters through tabletop, and when I got to live action, you have to think about, all right, well, I'm going to be doing this a lot. I'm going to have armor and make clothing and buy costuming and all this sort of thing. So it's got to be something you really want to be involved in. And with my kind of like love of the woods and all that, and the ranger thing, obviously, years ago I was a Boy Scout, so that whole thing kind of tied in. And the guy I was playing with was a Boy Scout, and we just really got into that whole let's be woodsmen, and we played wood elves. And I was at a time in my life where I was really I saw the world a little more black and white in terms of morality, and I was just going to be a good guy, and good and evil were very black and white to me, and I was going to be a good guy. I was going to fight the evil, and I think that affected my filter in that game because, as far as I remember, everybody but my group was evil. They were just all bad guys, and they had to be dealt with. And I played that character. I also brought the rangery aspect in, but in hindsight, there was a lot of paladin in there. There was a lot of really, and that was a good guy. It was a really good character, and I loved that character. I was constantly putting myself. I was a thorn in the side of all the, in my mind, the bad guys, and just constantly meddling in their affairs. And I think at first they were like, "Who is this annoying mosquito? Get out of the way!" And then I wouldn't quit, and eventually more and more and more, just got into all of these situations where a lot of players in that game were, keep your head low, don't cause trouble. I'm like, where's the trouble? Let's go. And I think that's one of the things that I've always loved about live action role playing. I don't get the same experience in many other genres where I'm like, this is a game. If there's a time, where you can just not actually care, who cares? We can just do whatever we want to do. And I was always amazed at people who were so conservative. That was my perspective, at least. I was like, just go for it, right? So I did all kinds of stuff as that character. Now, I learned a lot of life lessons, and I learned life lessons that in another time, in another era, if that were real life, it wouldn't have gone so well for me, because that was fun to do, but I really did learn a lot of things. And later, when I read the books Game of Thrones, I was absolutely struck. I was like, I was Eddard Stark. That was Ned Stark. And I got executed like Ned Stark did. But in games, you get to come back and try again. So, you get to learn whereas that wouldn't have gone so well. It affected a lot. I did that character for years, and it affected. I also, over the years, watched a lot of people having a lot of fun being those villains and shady characters like that. At least that was my perception of it. And my second favorite, so that was my first character. He was Tal for short. Tal was a wood elf. And then later, when I began playing Legends, I said, I'm not going to be, and Tal was a leader and in charge. I said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to be not the guy in charge. I'm going to be pulling strings. I'm going to be doing the sneaky, shady stuff. I'm not going to be restricted by all this morality and do-gooder stuff, because, I'd really had a learning experience growing up about, wow, there's a lot of that good and evil is not. I learned things later about characters that I had just assumed people were doing things to my enemies, and I learned they were dealing with just as many struggles and being manipulated just like I was. And I was like, wow, there's a whole deeper game going on here. I got to get wise to this, and I'm not just going to be a sucker this whole time, So this time I was going to pull some strings, and I played a some people might call him a bit of a scoundrel, but really was a swashbuckler. And that was incredibly liberating. That was so much fun. So really that was my favorite character. And Valeris von Gunrich was his name. And he went on to later become an NPC because I began running stories in there. But I was able to kind of keep the theme going with him as an NPC. But I just had an absolute blast. I had some great stories. I got to do things that Tal would have never, ever done. And I really realized how many people I had cut myself off from by being that militant as my first character. Everybody talked to Valeris. Everybody liked Valeris, and at least they acted like they did, to my face. But I was able to get into any social circle and have a lot of fun, and I built the character that way, and I thought that was great. And I learned a whole nother aspect of humanity, I think, through that as well. So that was probably my favorite character.
Do you think that's helped you, like, in the real world or outside of the LARPing?
I do. I've thought about this sometime. There may have been times when I let too much of that character creep into my real life, and wait a minute, you need to stick to that morality that Tal had, because you can really get a lot done the other way, but it's not ethical, and you can get into some fun experience and just enjoying life and throwing yourself into it has limitations. You got to remember that's a game, and so I think there are times where a little too much Valeris got into to Chris, and I had to tone it back, but that always as it's true, it always reveals a side of you. Like I think that strong moral character in me was and the Ranger came out at first, and then the side of like, I want to have a good time, I want to enjoy myself, that came out in another character. But those things taught me a lot about people, also a lot about how people are and how people operate. Like I said, when I read Game of Thrones, I went, wow, we've all done this. We lived this. I don't know, and that's not something you get from just reading or watching movies.
So I think it's interesting that you brought up Game of Thrones. Would you say that Valeris was based off of a particular character from there?
He was a mix of a lot of different characters. Okay. There was some influence. Like I said, when I read that book, I said, I'm definitely not being Ned Stark again. And I hadn't ever read, those books came out long after that character, but the books were out when I did create Valeris, and there was a little bit of different aspects of everything. There was a lot more of the social aspect. Some of the characters in that book that were social, like Vars the Spider and Littlefinger, I made sure to incorporate some of that into that character.
Interesting. So let me ask you this. You mentioned that sometimes a little bit of Valeris got into Chris. Have you ever had LARP dreams or things like that?
Oh yeah. Yes. Okay. I've had a lot of LARP dreams. and yeah.
Okay.
I'm not going to get into a lot of them. I would say that one of the things that struck me about LARP dreams is I always know it's a LARP. You know, I don't ever. I'm not immersed in my character, and I think that's something I always tried to do. Was one of the things I learned about LARPing is that as much as my group went in with this attitude of like, there's in game and there's out of game, and everybody else needs to get over it. And I think I've had to learn through the years that it's not that simple. You know, the things that are happening to you are really psychologically affecting you. They're really having an impact, and people are tired. And another lesson I learned is that people will, like I think they do with actors, they'll begin to associate you with that character. I can, in hindsight, looking back, people treated me a certain way when they knew me as Tal, when they knew that character. People treated Chris a very different way, I think, in some subtle undertones when they knew me as Valeris. And I thought that was really an interesting thing that does bleed over.
Definitely. I definitely see that as well, you know, through different characters I've played. But I think it's interesting that what you're saying is that when it's Solar, when people had the opportunity to kind of be more darker, for lack of a better term, most people kind of took that opportunity, but you took the opportunity to be kind of more light, for lack of, you know, for again, lack of a better term, more goodly or that sort of thing.
Well, I was a pretty serious, intense character to a lot of people. I just didn't want to hold back, but in a different way. And again, that was sort of my reality filter. You know, I learned later in that character's experience that if I stopped hounding all the bad guys and going after them, which is something that I wanted to role play and do, but when we just couldn't so much anymore for various reasons, they all went at each other. And you know, that was one of my best life lessons. I actually have a list somewhere now that I think I'm not going to get it out, but I've made a list of like 10 things, everything you need to know in life, kind of thing, you know, that you learned from LARPing. And I remember one of my rules was a position of power will always open up above you. Somebody's always going to leave and open that power gap. And I've seen that throughout my life. I've seen people in jobs come and go, and an opportunity always presents itself. It happens very rapidly in a LARP setting, but it's just interesting stuff like that.
Sure. Okay, so you've kind of talked a little bit about your characters. Now, I know you've done a lot of work in terms of creating games and game design and stuff like that. When it comes to NPCs, is there a particular NPC that you like more than others, or that was fun, or something neat?
Well, I should say that in 28 years ago, I started doing this. And in that time, whatever the math actually ends up being, I would say that honestly, 75% of that has been me actually running games and not playing. It wasn't very long. You know, I had my fill of playing, but then I really fell in love with I want to run a game. I want to tell a story. I want to make my world. I want to make a world. I want to bring this experience, because I'm a person that when I experience something, I want other people to experience that. I want to have them that same excitement. And so I was very motivated by that. And I thought, wow, here's the way I want to do it. And I found some like-minded people. So, you know, when we talk about characters, it's hard for me also not to talk about NPCs, because I've made so many of them. And they're always a little thinner than characters. They intentionally have to be, but some of them been pretty deep. And again, the same effect. People will start to perceive you, I think, sometimes by the way you play an NPC. I had to become very aware of that as a LARP owner. I had to realize that I've got to be very careful about how I act to players, because, you know, if I'm too aggressive, this is something that actually people are far more aware of in this day and age, that the way you do act to people and your emotional intensity and things like that can bleed over into real life. And so I try to be very careful about that. But then when I can set up a character as a villain, and it's clearly a villain, then it's kind of back to black and white. And it's like, okay, you're playing the villain. I like to make sure I try to have some makeup on and things like that, to where it's very hard to tell. So there's been characters, NPCs, that are fun to play.
Mhm.
There are actually some that were really tedious. They're not really fun to play, but they were necessary to push the story along. They were necessary to entertain certain type of people. And I don't really know how I could pick one.
Okay.
You
Was there
know,
maybe a particular encounter that you just had a lot of fun with that you want to?
yes. Well, actually, okay. Well, maybe one of my favorite NPCs would be Muradoc. Not even a character in the lore that I didn't come up with, but ended up playing. And he was our equivalent of the Dark Fae Prince, and he was all into mischief. He was a Puck style character, that archetype, the Loki-ish type,
Sure.
and just always causing trouble. So anything I might have done is any of my PCs, you know, this was full on. I could just really directly intervene and cause chaos on purpose. And so that was always fun to do. I'd always had to be very careful and monitor it. But one of the most fun encounters we had, we built this whole thing up. And one of the things that I would do is with NPCs, I see them as a device. And they push the story along and they have a function. And, you know, you need to get, just like in a good story, you need to get people really angry at somebody. Just that guy, we're going to get him, right? So you got to really work everybody up so that they're really ready to come after you.
So that emotional investment.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons. And sometimes people thought, like, you know, you come out as an NPC and then everybody's like, oh, he's a bad guy and let's drop him and kill him. And sometimes people can be frustrated with that. Like, oh, you're, you know, if they can't get you, right? And they think you're being cheesy and you're like, well, what I'm actually trying to do. And I'd have to be really careful about my encounters so that I didn't set up circumstances where you could just kill that NPC quickly. Because I'm trying to build a long-term villain and he needs to be able to get away. And you need to be able to, we need to build this towards this bigger ending, right? So you really get the satisfaction out of it, because, you know, what fun was it if Thanos had showed up and they just killed him and that was the end of that movie, right? So you got to build this up, right? So we built this up to a trial. So he was the Dark Prince. We had a very standard mythological idea where you had a dark court and a light Fey court. And so we got everybody together that players could sort of, you know, they were dark and light representatives. We put them together in a Fea trial, and the Fea trial was to try to put Muradoc on trial. And so the players were going to get to decide. I always like to let players have the choice. They were going to get to decide, was this guy guilty or not of all these crimes and all this other stuff.
Right. Okay.
And I thought, boy, how are we going to do this? I've got to write an encounter. We've always heard about Fea trials and how crazy they are. It's going to look something like a Mad Hatter Tea Party in Alice in Wonderland. You know, what is this going to look like? So I sat down and I wrote all of these rules for what a Fea trial is like, and just made it as crazy as possible, but with a principle in game design called emergence, where I really don't know what's going to happen. And I also, I don't want my story to have an outcome. I want the players to honestly decide. It goes either way. They can free him, they can convict him or not. But definitely we're going to play by the rules that the Fey would play by. And the Dark Fey are pretty sneaky and tricky, you know, and the Light Fey are also sneaky too, but they each had their rules. So won't go into all of the mechanics, but I'll give you a brief overview. We had our standard 12 jury. You had 12 jurymen. And then you had a whole other side. Each sort of had their representatives, the light and the dark, and they were called the interrupters. And every interrupter had this one interruption stick, and they were allowed to interrupt to do one thing. That was understood. And I'll give you an example because I didn't know how this was going to work out. So we're having this trial, and I'm playing the NPC. I'm being interrogated, and the prosecuting attorney for the light side is saying, Muradoc, did you do this or did you not do this? And I'm evading the answer, and I'm doing, you know, no answering and dodging the answer. And it's just, and finally the judge says, Muradoc, stop it. You have to answer. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm cornered. I've got to answer. So I'm about to say, well, and one of the interrupters says, interrupt. And they walked up and they said, I would like to call a witness to the stand. And the judge is like, okay. So I left the stand, and the new witness came forward, and the judge says, proceed. And everyone just burst out giggling because they knew what was happening here. And he put the question forth, did you or did you not? And the new witness said, I can absolutely say that I did not do that. So that kind of stuff happened. And one of the things the players did that I didn't even anticipate, particularly clever player, clever person in general, BJ Campbell, I think, figured it out. He managed to rig the jury, and one of the things they were able to do was trade one jury member around. And so by the time it ended, at the very end of the thing, I think they'd made a pretty good case that Miradoc was a villain and needed to be dealt with. But a very famous NPC played by Lane Harris, rest in peace, his character's name was Nightshade. A really funny, wonderful character. One of my favorite characters I've ever seen anybody play. And he was the defense attorney, and he stepped forward and said, well, yeah, everything you said, prosecuting attorney, everything you said, I can't do nearly as well as imitating Lane here, but he just did such a great job. But he basically wrapped it up saying, yes, but it doesn't matter anyway because I've rigged the jury. And then they made a vote, and the jury voted in favor of the Dark Prince. And it never had anything to do with anything that anybody really actually innocent or guilty. It was just, but the thing is that myself and the players were just laughing constantly. Every news situation was hilarious. And, I wish that was on film. And it's one of the things I've thought about that is, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Art historians are very big into archiving art. And our art form, it doesn't have a way to be really archived. Those, if you weren't there, and I actually appreciate that you're doing something like this, because this is kind of one of the only ways we have to tell these stories again. If you weren't there, you don't get it. How do you get LARPing? It looks ridiculous when you film it. You watch people LARPing. We are, you can go all the way down the gamer totem pole, and everybody else can feel better about themselves when they watch, at being a gamer watching LARP videos, because it just looks ridiculous. But when you experience it, there's nothing like it. And you're like, this is the best ever. I'll never be able to tabletop roleplay the same way. Because I remember when WoW, World of Warcraft came out, and we lost so many people from the LARP community to World of Warcraft. Mm-hmm. And then we thought, well, this is it. LARPing's gone online now. And everybody sat around and got out of shape and played World of Warcraft for a while. And then they all went, man, I miss LARPing. It's just not the same. And then people started coming back again. And it's just something there that you can't replicate any other way.
Mm-hmm. So I was actually in that encounter that you were just talking about.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
Our character, or my PC, your NPC didn't really work together or didn't care for each other much, but which is part of it. But you're right. This isn't there's no other way to replicate what happens out there, and it's a spur of the moment. What's going on? Having this awareness and still trying to play everything, and it's not easy, but it's fun, and it's just So sorry, I didn't mean to take away from what you were saying. I was actually just trying to add to it. That's
no, and that's you're right. That's cool that you were there, because you got to experience that, so you remember it. Somebody else. Wish we could have had a way to record it. It makes me wonder, is there a way to ever go back? Everything's a Netflix series now. Boy, could we ever do that? Record it some way.
Yeah, it'd be a little tough, but again, I think by having these stories, that we can at least now kind of talk a little bit more about it and share it with the next generation, that they can get involved. They can learn a little bit from what we're doing here, and that sort of thing. I guess let me ask you this. So you play different characters. You've had different, lots of NPCs and stuff like that. Was there a particular item or token that ever meant, just a lot more to you than its actual kind of, value? Just something that maybe you got from someone, or that you in play stole, or that was just, something that meant something to you?
I've always been more of a fan of my costuming items. I still have Valeris's hat. It's one of those big plumed hats. That's a good one.
Nice.
His coat, his pirate coat, is pretty cool. But I do have to say that the item from LARPing that means most to me is probably not a in-game item. But I have, actually, you can see it. I have a picture of our 10th year anniversary. It's probably pretty hard to see, but it's a whole bunch of Legends players at a 10th anniversary all together there, and then they gave me this really cool dagger, you know, and that's and a little crazy medal, and as silly as it is that, you know, it's this little icon, it's a thing that says, wow, you know, you did this thing for 10 years and affecting people that way. That's what I did it for. I wanted to affect people's lives and give them stories they would remember forever. And so that's my most cherished LARP thing, item, possession.
Very cool. So was there ever an encounter that just didn't go quite the way that you expected it to? I mean, obviously this is one of them that you mentioned with the trial of Miradoc, but was there one that kind of went just really like offbeat?
There was a few. There was a few. I would say that to speak to that a little bit more, well, experientially, I had in my first experience with running what we often call plot. In Solar, they called it plot, and I got my time doing that. I bungled into a lot of things. I did all the beginner mistakes. I tried to set things up in linear fashion, and they were supposed to go a certain way, and when they didn't, because in that game other players were constantly interfering, and I was put in situations where I really did things that I think were not the best decision to make some players enjoy their experience, but unfortunately at the expense of some of the other players, which were bad guys, and I literally just pulled, you know, ambushes and things like that away. I had one group that was one situation. One group, I was trying to make it all in game, you know, very narrative like, so they literally walked their module, and a bad guy group followed them and ambushed them on the module, and I had to just like storytell it out with it was terrible. And they rightly so were annoyed. But I learned from that, and I said, all right, I'm never going to have things set up this way. It's always going to be whatever happens, but I've got to foresee these things happening. I learned so much about what kind of stuff players will do to each other in that, you know, in that first Solar experience. And so I always tried to account for it. And so most of the stories that when I got some more experience, those were things that when they went off the rails, that was enjoyable. That was fun to watch because it didn't matter. Now, I don't know if the players always had the best time with it, but I was completely fine with it. And I even, to this day, anybody, you know, watching was part of those, whenever players would be like, we figured this out and you forgot this, and you know, I'm like, and I would just kind of laugh, oh yeah, you got me. But the truth was, like, it wasn't planned to go a certain way. I didn't care. I was planning for emergence. I wanted interesting things to happen, and that's where I began to get a lot of joy. Also, as a designer, that sticks in my design philosophy to this day. I don't want to know exactly how everything's going to play out. I want a sort of a controlled emergence, right? So there were some things that threw me for a loop here and there. Some players did some things, but I enjoyed being surprised by players once I got my head on straight about it.
So I guess there's just a lot of times sometimes that you felt like just players were just completely different than you expected, different reactions. Is that kind of
yeah, my brain is full of so many different kind of stories like that. But there were plenty of times. I will tell you, okay, I have a story. So one of the people that we had, this player, Paul Moore, and Paul was a funny guy. For anybody that knew Paul, big burly, you know, military guy in the Army, but also just had this lovable, goofy side to him. So a lot of people, they liked Paul, but some people just didn't really take him that seriously. You know, he just had this. Sorry, Paul, if you're out there listening, but he's probably pretty aware, right? And some of that's his character again. You know, how much was that this character he was playing? But this character would sort of say these things that out of nowhere that were the complete right answer to the story or whatever was happening. And I more than once, Paul just looked up and said, well, what if it was just that this and this and this, and what if this was really happening this way? And everybody just stopped and looked at it, and I went, oh no, he
figured it out.
Completely figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody went, Paul, shut up. And just kept going on. I was like, phew. But he had this weird insight and then he wouldn't trust himself after that. He was like, yeah, well, never mind. But he would guess things that other people just didn't guess. They were thinking way too deep about it or too complicated. That was those kind of things would happen. But
did you feel when you were on plot that sometimes you had to like kind of beat people over the head with certain ideas or things that you wanted them to do? Did you ever kind of run into that?
I do feel like I had to train people. A lot of our players are coming from games where they really legitimately could not trust the storytelling committees. They were rotating in and out. There was no guarantee of stability. You had all kinds of people just had a distrust of storytelling committees, and they didn't want to invest in a long-term story. And one of the things that I had to start doing we really pushed this in the beginning of when I started storytelling my first group. We're going to build things and put details in, and we're going to let everybody know by the time a story has resolved, we're going to really train them that these little details matter and your choices do matter. And we are going to let you make whatever decision you want to make. It really is. It's not rigged. We're not here to, abuse you. We're here to entertain you. The first thing I did when we changed the name and when I started running a committee, we threw out the name Plot, as accurate as it might be for storytelling perspective, but we changed the name to Entertainment Committee because broadly it was about, I wanted everybody to be conscious. We are here to entertain people. That's our goal, is to entertain them and make an entertaining game. And there will be stories as part of that, but it's not always what we're doing. So I think training people that we are here to entertain you and not win, not beat you up and and try to win. That's not it.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this: in Legends or in the game, you guys have done something that I've never seen before, and I just kind of want to ask you about it. You guys actually had a place for people to go bad. Like there was literally like legal schools and illegal schools, which anyone could take, but you also had the void. So in Legends, the void was the bad, like death and necromancy was bad, but everyone could agree that this is worse than that.
Well, we ran into a little bit of a problem when there were all these magics and things like necromancy, and it's illegal, but you at the same time, because I didn't actually create the original rule system on that. Sure. And so I was dealing with it and working it into story, and that's fine. It was a really very interesting, rich magic system, but it had some bad magics in it, which were kind of considered illegal. I in different times that changed, but I said, okay, so I've been thrown in a situation where I've got players who are illegal just by their choice of character. They're illegal. What are we doing? What are we going to do with that? And we began to move a little bit more. And I guess you kind of see some similar ideas in deeper stories with, even if you take Star Wars has gone, this was of course long before that, but not long before Star Wars, but before they started really pushing this idea that there's a perspective to the dark side that maybe we don't have. There's a lot of that trend now where let's dive into the history of a villain, and maybe they have some really good reasons why they're villainous. Sure. And again, generate some sympathy. And it's like, we've got to have, and one of the answers was we've got to have a worse thing. And there was a thing there called Void that I started with, and I just really took that and ran with it and made Void the really bad thing, because Void destroys magic. And so everybody else is like, you and your necromancy and you and your, purification, blah, blah, blah. But all of a sudden, oh boy, here's the Void. We may want to consider working together now, and I found that was really effective. Such a terrifying, overbearing enemy, but the way we worked it in was they only showed up in these certain kind of like cyclical points. And so, they were going to come in for a while, almost like raiders, and be horrible. And then they would leave, and you just kind of had to deal with it. But it always created this background threat. And that eventually led into a story about why were they doing this and what were they up to. And that was a very long-term story arc. But having that thing that was worse, that was an interesting device as a storyteller, I think.
Sure.
I've used that ever since. But back to your question.
Is there any stories you could tell us that are okay about the Void or interactions that you thought were fun?
Oh, so many. So you mentioned turning people bad, right? So we had this one character. It occurs to me that I think Jared might be listening out there. I saw Jared, and
he was on here.
He did a follow-up and filled in for me later. He filled in for me some of these guys, these NPCs later when I couldn't play them. But I was wondering, I know he played Miradoc at one point, but they had another person play this one character, Gavel, and that may have been. In any case, Gavel was this character. He was the Void teacher. He was the voice of the Void. Every one of these NPCs represented a different aspect of the Void, and he was the calm and soothing voice that just convinced you that everything was going to be all right, and that, this whole deal, right? And so he would try to logically but very calmly convince you about all these awful things and make them seem completely rational. And he had a book, and I still have the book to this day. And I'm going to say, for in-game props, that's going to be my favorite one. That was my favorite one. So I took this big giant phone book, and painted it all up black. I was inspired by the Necromondicon from Army of Darkness. Sure. And I cut it out so that I could put a radio in it. And it had a little mouth on it and everything like that. And I took it into the Mages Academy, where the head, and I was just taking this thing around and doing what I could. And so I would stay around the side of the building while the book began, talking to people. And I would talk as Gavel through the book and just see who would bite. And of course, turns out, who better than the head of the Mages Academy? Yes, right, and I am. And I ended up convincing, as an NPC, the head of the Mages Academy, the guy who was supposed to be the protector of all magic and all this sort of thing in town, he really should explore. He maybe had some things wrong, and he really needed to explore this other aspect. And the Void wasn't so bad after all. He ended up. So he took the bait, and what we did is we said, okay, and I'll call him out because he's probably quite proud of this. It was a wonderful experience. But that's Chris Carpinella. So he decided. We said, listen, here's the thing. This is for real, and it's probably going to mean the end of your character. So we created something I'd never had before, which was a form he had to sign. We said, basically, I'm turning over all, like, I'm playing my character, but plot effectively can come in and do anything to me, and I'll probably lose my character too. So we just said, listen, this is, if you go this route, you're just consider your character gone, but you're going to have a whole lot of fun doing it. And so he stayed in as a PC true bad guy. And we didn't have a lot of really true bad guys, but like an actual villain, not like a,
so
let's just aggro a really good villain, right? And he just did all kinds of stuff. And he went with it. And so he did such a good job with it that we really we incorporated him later as an NPC. When all those guys would show up, the bad guys, the Void, he got to come play with them and be part of them. And he became a powerful NPC on the bad guy side. That was a lot of fun. That was really cool for him. And we enjoyed it. We got to enjoy that experience as well.
So, you've kind of mentioned a couple of things, but is there one thing that was particularly crazy that you probably should have never done at a LARP? For example, for me, I almost went.
Should have never done at a LARP.
Right. Like, keep it clean, but, I've I saw some people going in a rowboat in like 100 pounds of chainmail. Probably could have gotten very hurt, but you know.
Well, two things come to mind. I don't know about should have never done, but this is the borderline one. But when I wanted to make a really dramatic entrance as a particularly aggressive, you know, again, had built up a lot of hate around this one character, this NPC, who was a this master assassin guy, right? He was part of this team. Everybody, he was part of these bad guys everybody was looking for. And so when he showed up, then I made the introduction of the character, got some help, climbed up on Hard Labor Creek, one of those pointed roofs, and I thought, all right, I stood up there and I monologued at everybody. Now that wasn't so bad, but then hey, we're in game, and yeah, the Dirge was his name, and then Brent Parmalee, one of our players, decides he's playing. This just was like, man, this was his particular personal. He really hated this guy and wanted to get him. Starts throwing spell packets at me. So I'm like, well, I've got to get out of the way. So I'm trying to dodge spell packets on the top of this pointy little roof, and fortunately didn't fall off. But after I ran out of a few defensive abilities, I was like, I got to get down. This is not going to go well. So there's that one. But I think the one, if I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't have done, I actually ran a module in an actual graveyard on Hard Labor Creek. And one of the people helping me set up the module was a really big guy, and he was walking around on the gravestones and put his foot about 3 feet into the ground, and we were like, all right, we're done. So yeah, that maybe shouldn't have done that.
Nice. Okay.
I just wanted the atmosphere.
I mean, that definitely sounds.
After that, it was all fake gravestones. So,
so I was going to ask you what you thought was probably the coolest encounter. I'm guessing that might have been it.
Oh, God, there's so many. I mean, there's so many cool encounters. I do remember, you talk about LARP dreams, okay? So I did actually have a dream once where there was this wall of fog. And again, I knew I was at a LARP, but actual skeletons came out of the fog, out of the woods through this fog. And it just impacted me so much. I said, this is going to be great. I got to do this. So I planned, and Halloween is, if you've been to LARPs, you got to do Halloween right. And I planned this thing well in advance, and I set it up. I actually ordered, just, we had actual prop budgets. So I did some research, and I found out what do they use on movie sets. And I got this really expensive, awesome fog machine that would get that kind of a wall of fog. And I set it up in a field and blew all this stuff. And the town came down, and they saw a little building that we had set up and things like that. And they all came down. And what I had done was I wanted to make this to be impactful. So I had gotten a lot of people together to monster in undead costumes and masks and everything like that. It was about 40. They were all hidden behind that fog. And the town advanced, and one couple skeletons and undead come out, and then another one, and then another one. And pretty soon people realize there's like a lot of these things. And the town actually starts to turn and run, which was awesome. I was like, I wanted that moment. That moment was impactful. Everybody will remember that. So that was pretty cool. And then they had to sort of go in, and it was the encounter became a big wave of undead, and they basically had to get into this mausoleum and figure out the puzzle how to shut off the undead spawning. It was a cool encounter, but that moment of impact, that was a good one. There were so many, though. I mean, so many fun encounters.
Is there a particular place that you go to, or that you kind of pull these cool encounters, or encounter ideas from? Like, if I was to be on plot or an entertainment committee, like, what do you do to kind of, come up with a encounter?
Well, I learned something years ago about being a creative person, professional, and it was that a lot of times what you really need to do is look into parallel media.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a friend that talked about like artists, often visual artists, would rather kind of hang out with musicians and watch what they do, because you get a bunch of people in their craft, artists together, and they will learn, but they just get like very kind of like, you know, overly self-involved and self-aware, or like not even, you know, it's just like they're too hypercritical of what they're doing. You know, you get a group of musicians together and they're all like, oh, that band sucks and those guys can't play and all this, but then they go, and then they're highly appreciative of art. It's a weird thing that can happen where you get, I don't know if it's threatened or whatever. I've seen it in LARPs where people are like, well, you can't play this LARP and that LARP, and are they gonna, you know, all this other stuff. And I would go to LARPs maybe to see like how they ran things, but I almost never was inspired in that medium for story. You know, from books, from story, I think I've always like started from like an idea maybe of a cool scene, sometimes like an impactful moment I want to create. Something might influence me, but it may come from anywhere. It can come from, and it might come from listening to a song, you know, maybe even the lyrics of a song. There are a lot of different ways to be inspired. Sometimes I've joked, I do my best work in my sleep. Sometimes I'll wake up with an idea and it's a crazy idea I want to do. So, you know, just so many things that it can come from. But I think, and then game ideas, sometimes from actual games, you know, playing games, things like that. So it can come from all over. I think some of it, looking back, I think there were a lot of things that probably impacted me as a child, and as that I really kind of always wanted to somehow play out in LARPs or give people that experience. I remember some people talk about being terrified of Willy Wonka as a kid, and I thought, this is the coolest guy ever. I want to do that to everybody. I want to be Willy Wonka and create this whole thing and send them all through this experience. You know, I always thought, so that whole idea, so something like Willy Wonka might inspire me. Like, I got to have a chocolate factory concept, you know, module. So we'll see that. Now there's going to be a chocolate factory module with things that kill you.
That's awesome.
But
very fun. That's really cool. So I guess kind of, you know, how has LARPing affected you in real life? Like, has it helped you, you know, with jobs or in your professional life? Obviously yours is probably a little different than most, but you know.
Well, I've seen, first of all, I've seen where a lot of people, and I know they've, you know, there are better people to ask that question of, but obviously they're not being interviewed, but they've really done some things with LARPing. And I've seen what it can do to people who are really like wallflowers and how they come out of their shell. But I think I think there is a something I even have to be careful of to this day. There is a removal of certain kinds of anxiety or concern about doing certain things and engaging something initially for the first time. And I know that's a little bit of abstract, but for example, a lot of people, when they get into their first combat, it happens to everybody, you know, they freeze up. What do I do? And you get to the point where you're like, it's combat, let's go, you know, and you just don't think about it. You don't have any of that freezing up. I think that's affected. Oh, and there's a great story for this. Okay, this is a real life story. Yes, and Ryan, I'm going to go here. So if you need to not hear this, that's okay, because Ryan was very personally affected by this this real life story, and it was bad for him, but he's better now. So I'll tell you the story. So this is a story we call the deck crashing party. And it was a time when we were doing something at a friend's house, and there was a deck, and it turned out that a couple of people were on this deck. Not enough to create too much weight, and there was a grill on the deck, and long story short, like, the deck had been built wrong. They determined all this later legally. The deck was built poorly, but the deck collapsed, and people fell off the deck. People were under the deck. I was in the basement at the time, and with a couple of the other people running the game we were running, and we heard this blood curdling scream and all this stuff going on, and nobody hesitated. We went to get what's going on. We opened the door, and we couldn't open the door because it was stuck. It was on one of these doors, and they had a thing said, the door's broken. And me and my business partner at the time, Matt Meldrum, looked at the door, and we just picked it up and took it right off the sliding glass door right off, and everybody went piling out. People are shouting orders. We got this heaviest thing I've ever had to pick up. It feels like, and we're all picking it up. Paul Moore, to his credit, like I said, this guy's a military guy. A guy I mentioned earlier is standing in the coals, not even aware of it, but holding this thing up so we can get the people out from under. And we had some people who were medics. We triaged people. By the time the ambulance and the fire department and everybody got there, I heard someone had said, "Who are you guys?" It was just like everybody here is used to jumping into action immediately, and we're used to doing it together. And I think that was something that, like, I'm never really that concerned in a stress situation like that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it definitely helped there. Like I mentioned before, dealing with people, knowing what people are capable of. My first character was far too trusting of people. Well, he was trusting and not trusting at the same time. It was interesting. I suspected everybody, but like, I guess you might say it's like the ability to cut yourself off and not have any idea what anybody's up to. And that's always been a tough thing for me, and I have to, I gotta know what's happening. I gotta know what people are doing and stay in contact with them. And, which is a struggle, especially in these times. Right. But just being aware of what humans are capable of, and, the Game of Thrones is real, sometimes, and but that also people are very good. And I think the other thing I got of it, and I should really say, is that out of play, I'm talking about people are capable of, really, you see it through characters, right? But I mean good things too. I don't just mean like negative. Because we have a community, and I don't think many people in the world get to know so many people and feel so close to them, even years later. I brought people into my friend circle, and I've had to realize they're not feeling the same way. These people here are so tight knit and so known each other for so long that it's hard to just instantly fall into that and feel comfortable. And it's like, wow, we have this bond and we have this experience, and it's like this family and this community that just, I don't know many other ways you can get something like that. And that's been something that I think has been very impactful for me.
No, definitely. I completely understand that. The stuff that, people go through, even though it's, it's not real, it's LARPing, but the different combats, the different stressful situations, learning good news, bad news that comes through these games. It definitely changes the relationship that you build with people that you can't get from just, or that's harder to get from the regular friendship type of thing. It takes a little bit more time, I think, if it's even possible.
Yeah, I think it may have been like Plato or Socrates. One said, there's a quote about, you never really know a person until you play a game with them. Mm-hmm. You get to know people very well because you're always playing this game with them, and you get to know them much more quickly and much more accurately, I think, in some ways.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree with you. But kind of, talking about that, is there, and this whole community, which I think is kind of really what you hit the nail on the head, which is what we're trying to create. We're trying to help build with, this video cast, whatever we want to call it. But is there any any advice that you'd give to new LARPers that are looking to get involved into this scene?
Yeah, it's almost generational advice. There's memes everywhere, now TikTok's the big thing, and you watch the generation talk. So I'm a Generation Xer, so you got to take this for what it is. But I would say that try to embrace the idea that this is a game and you're there to experience things that aren't supposed to be the same as real life, and things that are uncomfortable. That's okay. This is a chance for you to experience things that aren't as comfortable for you normally. Break out of some of that. See things from a different perspective. Like, every generation is absolutely sure that they have it right, you know, when they're young, that kind of thing. And it's just a meme, right? You'll grow up later. So, but every generation brings something new that evolves us also. So bring that, you know, but also just don't take it quite so seriously. Like, take it seriously as your characters. We always had an understanding that there was a line of you're not the person you're playing. That's like you know, and this is a little bit too much of this idea of bleed, I feel. So I would cautiously advise to just try to draw a line between that, not get so personally offended by something that a character's role playing, trying to pretend to be someone. It's very hard to say, I'm going to be a villain and do things that you find offensive. And I'm not talking about like real lines. Like, we're not going to cross HR lines here, but those are foggier. But I'm just saying, like, I'm going to be rude and a bad person so that you hate this character, right? And if you don't give any room for that, then, you know, that's an issue. But have fun. Just go to have fun and experience things in a new way.
Okay. No, I mean, that's absolutely great. Definitely agree. You know, is there anything that you think that we could also do to get more people to come out to LARPs? Like, is there something we're missing out on, or is it? And without getting into COVID and that sort of stuff, but, you know, in general, if things weren't and we didn't have that, you know, is there another way that you think we should be reaching out to newer players?
I've thought a lot about this, and I can't get too deep into it because it really gets into. I'm not even an expert, you know, in this, but I do think, on the one hand, I'd say that to younger LARPers coming in, and newer LARPers, but on the other hand, we have to figure out how to relate to. There seems to be a divide right now. What I've really noticed, there's a very big difference, and it's unfortunate because what LARPing's always been is community. It's the thing that brought us all together. We were always very open, and as much as we understood diversity back then, you know, we could be part. And now it's obviously really exploded and expanded into a much broader spectrum, which is great. And LARPing's always been the place where everyone kind of can be welcome, and I want to see more of that. But we sort of have to understand what does everyone think that means. You know, there's some old LARPers that are stuck in their ways. They want certain things. They want, you know, we're that generation, and we don't even maybe have blinders on to even know. There are things that we do, like the social media that we use. The younger generation doesn't even care about some of the social media that we use. What are those platforms? And this is a lot of research that people pay a lot of money to do. You know, to understand, where should you be marketing, what kind of things should you be saying and doing, and that's a lot. You know, that's a big area that we don't put nearly enough thought into, I think, as the older LARPers. So, you know, some of that, but I think the younger LARPers will come in, they'll make their games, and they'll probably show us a lot of things that, you know, in action, we see how it plays out. So
sounds good.
That's kind of a long-winded, evasive answer, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So let me ask you this, kind of talking about a little bit of the future of LARPing, and I think you're a good person to ask this because you've created several LARPs. I mean, you're very well known in the LARPing industry. You've done things different. You've brought new ways of doing LARPing and rules and stuff to life. But, you know, where do you think LARPing will be in the next 5 years?
Next 5? I don't know. In the next 5, we've got to get actually out of COVID so we can go out and play. But we've always had the problem in LARPing that it's really, in the end, it's a hobby. It doesn't generate really, no matter what anyone ever thinks about prices or whatever models somebody's trying to gouge you, play to win, any of that stuff. Believe me, the digital game companies they've got everybody beat in that regard, and you're paying them plenty of money, right? So we don't have a lot of resources to work with, but using more and more technology, I think, is going to be much better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if in the next 5 years we're going to see a lot of physical technology integration, but our communication and database backends, I mean, a lot of LARPs are already doing this sort of thing, but where maybe we can bring more, we have the anachronistic problem of, do you really want to be carrying a phone around? You know, do you want to use, you know, cards where you can scan or use a chip or something like that, and being able to use data and immediately recognizable to your character and his stats, and you don't have to work certain things out. But then again, it is supposed to be a physical, it is live action role playing, so we have to be careful there. But ultimately, I think somewhere LARPing may just sort of fade into whatever virtual reality becomes. We're already seeing, so I guess, you know, I work at a location where we're building an XR studio. So for example, where, you know, how they shoot The Mandalorian. I always knew that this was never going to work for LARPing, you know, walking around with this thing on our faces, or any kind of heavy, bulky technology. But, you know, maybe playing in a place where sets are projected with projectors. Disney does a lot of this, right? Where they're projected onto 3D objects, and it looks like you can change out your props that way. Things with XR where your stage is surrounding you, and you can change out the environment, and when you move, it moves also, and you feel like you're in that space, just as backdrops. Because actors are doing that, you know. The Mandalorian's done that way. There's no worked in green screening on that. That's all somebody walking around in front of a giant movie screen, effectively. So that's all still very expensive, but, you know, maybe I don't know how, this is kind of dreaming, you know, because we're still also on the like, hey, is anybody going to get land? You know, apparently there's a place with a castle, but land just keeps getting more and more expensive, and we rely on state parks. Can anybody crack that? Is there a way to do something inside of warehouses or something where we're not having to be in such large spaces that are so expensive to rent?
Sure. That's a great question. You know, about, you know, but I mean, so here's my thought is that if you get into warehouses and stuff like that, I don't know if as many people would spend the night and that sort of thing. They might want to go home, sleep in their nice, cozy, warm bed, versus, you know, kind of sometimes some of these other campsites where we're kind of brave in the weather, and, you know, you're in this terrible little cabin for 4 people with, you know.
Yeah, and how many people want to be camping out anymore? That's another question that I'm like, I have to say, how much of that is my generation, you know, that wants to go into the woods and stay in a bug infested cabin? Do people even want to spend the night? You know, do they want to just come out for a daytime experience, that kind of thing? So
no, I mean, that's a great question. Actually, kind of speaking of that whole thing, I mean, you know, you talked a little about The Mandalorian, but obviously Disney has, you know, is creating their own, for lack of a better term, LARP, with the whole Star Wars Galaxy Cruiser.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, first of all, you know, it's $5,000 for 2 people, and it gets even higher than that for 4 people. I think it's a little bit over 6, or it's between like $5,000 and $6,000 for a 2-night stay. Now, it's supposedly Disney, and, you know, obviously there's a lot of money going in there, but, you know, how's that can compare? And I guess we'll kind of just see what happens.
Yeah, well, you know, it brings something up, and I thought up that we often, in the first part of the medium, an art form, or any kind of technology or any kind of advancement, whatever the first iteration isn't the thing that lasts. It becomes maybe something nostalgic, or we look back and go, huh, wasn't that interesting? And it was a step. And so, you know, LARPing just may stay this very small niche thing, but it may also show up when it becomes something that people really think about and remember. It may be something like that. Somebody like Disney can walk in and say, and then no one will call it LARPing. You know, we'll say, well, you guys are you're just LARPing. But when escape rooms came out, we're like, people are paying to go on modules. Cool, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it may not look at all like LARPing, and the word is terrible. It's such an awful phonetic word, LARPing, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not what anyone will probably recognize. It'll be something that, you know, if you think about everything that became popular that we did now, is I tell the younger generation, sometimes you're welcome. You know, we thought this stuff was cool, and we made sure that it survived, and it doesn't. And what became popular, you know, gaming growing up was like this just nerdy thing, and it was so nerdy and esoteric. And then suddenly, when it takes off and it's just normal, and everybody has a console or what, it's not what you necessarily would have thought it would look like. Who in the world would have thought, you know, the most popular movies in the 2000s are going to be superhero movies? We would have laughed at them, you know. And it takes some form where it evolves in something that that it doesn't look silly, and it looks cool, and everybody can get it, and then it's culturally acceptable to do it, and then people grow up with it and they don't even know any difference, you know. And where LARPing is in that, it's just too absolutely embarrassing looking, you know. It just, but the idea is there, and we know the experience is there. So if somebody captures that experience, throws a lot of money at it, and the Rise of the Resistance was the first thing I'd ever been to that I went, I feel kind of like I'm LARPing, but
So
with millions of dollars having been thrown at it.
Right.
And that's what we may ultimately see, something like that, you know. Of course, Disney will win again and take all the cool stuff and make it into something really cool with lots of money. So.
Sure. Just for those that don't know, Rise of the Resistance is the new ride at Disney World, where it's like a 15-minute long ride, and you go through all different stuff. It's Star Wars related. It's pretty amazing. So is there? First of all, we've been talking for a little bit over an hour and 15 minutes, but so I want to be careful of time. But is there any other last things that you want to mention, or story that you might want to tell, or, you know, last time we had Sean told a secret, or anything you just want to, you know, get off your chest in terms of the game or stories or anything like that?
I'll leave you with a silly story.
Okay.
And it's the time, and just to let you know some of the fun things that can happen if you go to a LARP and you stay up late enough, and everyone goes to bed, and just the really insane people stay up late. Fun things can happen, right? Because you're kind of off the rails. And so it was one night like this that I was telling about my character. Valeris was up in a pub that stayed open late. Of course, it was with just Kool-Aid and drinks. It was all not non-alcoholic stuff. So, but there may have been some sugar buzz happening there, and lots of late night loopiness with no sleep. But everyone's sitting around, and one of the things about this character, I'd said he was a swashbuckler, but he had been raised sort of like a gentleman pirate was the idea, but still an elitist in a very noble house. He rejected all of that and went, you know, but he still had this noble upbringing. So I always played him with this noble arrogance. And so he thought of peasants as peasants, and they were there to be pawns to be moved around. And we, unbeknownst to us, two NPCs walked in playing peasants, and we were like, this is too funny. And this is one of those things that the hilarity is just ensuing more and more and more. And we're sitting there talking about peasants, and, you know, well, and my character's making the argument, and people are like, yes, but don't you think it's unfair that they should be subjugated and da da da? I was like, no, but they're just stupid. They're dumb. They're just to be there for fodder. And I'm going through this ridiculous, horrible, you know, sort of diatribe on this. And I said, I'll prove it to you. So to be fair, I'd heard this joke. I stole from a joke I'd heard about goblins years ago at Solar. But I said, I'll give you a joke about this. And, so the peasants weren't there yet. I think they were standing around, milling around, doing something. And I said, it used to be a joke about goblins. I stole it from Solar. It said, two peasants walk into a bar. You'd have thought the second one would have ducked. And so I said, let's prove that. So I got a sword, and we held up the sword, and we told the first peasant, walk up into this bar, because we were in a bar. And he walked up there and bumped his head, and somebody said, 10 magic or whatever, and he fell down dead. I said, peasant, walk him into this bar. And he walked up into the bar and fell down. I said, see, there you go. And everybody's just rolling and laughter. It was never planned. It was just silly and improv. And that's just the kind of like those serendipitous moments. Like, how does that happen?
Nice.
And it's that kind of thing.
Awesome. Well, Chris, first of all, thank you for being here with us and just kind of sharing some stories and telling us a little bit more. That's been awesome. Is there anything that you're working on that you want to kind of share with us? Whether from
longest LARP in development ever. I am working on I finished, and we have my team that we're all working with. Splinter Dreams Production has finished the next Legends. It's technically in beta, but the only reason it's in beta is because we haven't officially been able to really get out and have events with COVID. But we have the next version of Legends called Legends Apotheosis. And we've introduced some new ideas in there where we have incorporated a lot of social aspects, mechanics for social things and exploration. A lot of aspects of LARPing that are often thrown in improvisationally or without any explicit rules, and we've actually made very explicit rules for these kind of things. And so that is a game that is we have a web. If you look for Legends Apotheosis on Facebook, it's out there, public site now. So
awesome. So people will be able to find it on Facebook
and there should be an LFG Nexus one at some point on. We had one on the previous version, and we've got to update it. So
yeah. So LG Nexus obviously is a place where people can find LARPs and LARPing events. So guys, please check that out. Just lgnexus.com. But I'm not trying to steal your time. Is there anything else that you're doing that you want to kind of show off or brag about or that sort of thing?
Nothing that I want to talk about just yet, but maybe in 6 months, there's some things that are in the works.
Awesome.
That I'll say I'm working on a board game. That's about it.
Awesome. Very cool. That's great to hear. Well, Chris, again, thank you so much for being part of this and for sharing some of your stories. They're definitely really interesting and loved hearing about them. I hope that other people will kind of get involved and get engaged and go check out Legends Apotheosis. So sorry about that.
Yep, come on out.
Also, so hey guys, just to let you know, we will be next week. We'll have a gentleman by the name of Ryan Brown that will be our storyteller. He's done some really good stuff, a lot of fun encounters, and really looking forward to having Ryan on. But Chris, thank you so much for being a part of this. And
Ryan actually has done some writing for our new game. He's done some really good stuff and helped in developing the story world. Mm-hmm. And he's worked on lots of other games too. Should be very entertaining to listen to.
Absolutely. I mean, I've loved his encounters. Always something different. He's brilliant guy when it comes to stuff. So we'll be having him next week. The week after that is a gentleman by the name of Brian Dow, who I haven't played with in a long time, but he also kind of comes from Solar, but he's playing a new game called Awakenings. And the person after him will be a woman named Debbie Rickerson Pass. So we kind of have people scheduled for the next 3 weeks. We hope you guys are enjoying this. Please let us know, if there's something we could do better, worse, and just, we want to just help kind of encourage this community because, it's just meant so much to us. But Chris,
thanks for having me.
Not a problem. We greatly appreciate you coming on and just being a part of everything. So we look forward to seeing, everything that you guys keep putting out and looking forward to that.
All right.
You have a great day. All right. And everybody have a great day. Come check us out at lfgnexus.com. We've got an app, both iOS, Android. We're doing a lot of neat stuff, things that I haven't seen before. And you'll also be able to find replays of these on our app or on our platform as well. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week. Same time, same station, 9 o'clock next Tuesday. Have a great night. Bye-bye.